Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of League Weekly. It is July 24th, 2017, and I am joined by three wonderful people who I've never met before in my life, but I found them on the street. I needed somebody to do a show with, and here they all are. We skipped a week, so we've got a lot to talk about, and all these people are going to help me talk about it. So first off, let's start with Kelsey Moser. How's it going, Kelsey?
Hi. I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Since there's no China topic this week, we'll just say happy birthday, Clear Love, and move on.
Nice.
Yeah.
My favorite type of
good stuff.
Happy birthday, Clear Love. Woo.
Happy birthday, Clear Love.
It's Launder's birthday as well.
Happy birthday, Launders.
He has the same birthday as Clear Love. Coincidence?
Nice.
All right. How's Germany?
Probably. Germany is nice.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
Does that mean your internet's gonna not die in the middle of this then?
I mean, sometimes it occasionally dies. It's just better quality generally. Yeah. I did the last episode in Germany as well. But
Yeah.
that had all sorts of other problems.
Yeah. None of which were mine. Let's put it that way. All right. First off, I also want to introduce Emily Rand. Emily Rand.
Hey.
How's it going?
I'm not deathly ill anymore.
Congratulations.
So,
that was like a month-long illness that you suffered through.
No, it was like 2 weeks though. It sucked. Yeah.
It felt like forever.
It felt like forever to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally we've got Mark Zimmerman. How's it going, Mark?
Pretty good.
What is the black backdrop behind you?
That's where I shoot the blame game, dude.
Okay. And you just stand there?
Yeah, they got a light right here.
Okay.
See this thing? And then I got a camera and all that stuff.
Behind the scenes with Mark.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's very not glamorous.
What is in that box next to it?
So that box is what my chair came in, and then I kept it because my first tripod was not tall enough to shoot me eye level. So eventually I started using my roommate's tripod more often, and now the box just sits there in case I ever need it, because you always need some good boxes.
Yeah. Some high-level technology.
I'm not going to even start telling you what my setup is right now because it's very terrifying. Yeah.
Really?
There's just there's some kitchen stools and some pillows, and that's about as far as we're going to go. You can use your imagination for the rest. Let's go.
All right.
As long as your camera doesn't start, like when I was in Brazil, my laptop would slowly start sliding off of where I had to prop it up on pillows. And then Ryan Stevens is always in my ear being like, stop it. And I'm like, I'm not moving. My laptop just keeps falling on me.
Luckily, with the expectations of our production value, we no longer have Ryan Stevens.
Yeah.
I know.
Things have only improved since my departure from Yahoo. All right. Well, first off, we need to get into these topics. I was going to keep saying first off. And we actually have some breaking news as of today. You can go check it out. It's up on the League of Legends subreddit on Twitter, elsewhere. Team Liquid is going to bring in mid laner Mickey. And this is very strange given that they've had a pretty good weekend. Emily, are you okay?
Before I respond to the very good weekend thing, I need to know why Emily's dying laughing.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Mickey.
Mickey is a really funny player.
Okay. It's just enough that the laugh.
Yeah, so
I mean, Mickey's history in and of itself is really hilarious because he started off where he was one of the highest non-signed players in Korean Challenger in 2014 when the Chinese were just starting to get on the import bandwagon. And he was a mid-lane Lee Sin one-trick. So they imported this guy without doing any research other than the fact that he was super high signed on the ladder. And the first game they played him as a jungler in his first professional game because he played Lee Sin. And that did not go well at all. So he became a mid laner, and that's how he became a mid laner. And I think that could kind of tell you right off the bat a few things about Mickey.
He is. It's just the whole decision really is a bit baffling to me.
Yeah.
He's like a player who basically can like actually still in today's League of Legends single-handedly lose you a game and single-handedly win you a game. And I feel like that's actually really rare nowadays. He's just like really inconsistent, hyper aggressive, always up in lane, does weird stuff that absolutely makes no sense, doesn't pay attention to vision, didn't even really know how to play mid lane that well, like in terms of like minion waves and vision control or any of that stuff until arguably sometime last year. He is known for being one of the few mid laners who can kind of like hold his own against Faker in lane, even though he's like really reckless.
I feel like that's not even a big thing anymore. I feel like half of the competitive mid laners can hold their own against Faker and Lin. Like,
it's just like it's really baffling to me that Team Liquid would pick up Mickey, and not just because I know a lot of people's initial reaction is like, well, this is hilarious because they're just coming off of their best week and they seem to have found some stability, and Golden Glue is not performing poorly. So why bring in Mickey? And obviously this, the signing must have happened not today, but previously. I'm sure they've been in talks. But the thing to me that's still really baffling is that what Team Liquid seems to need is like any semblance of consistency, right? And Mickey is such an inconsistent player and will never be a consistent player. Like he was at his most consistent last year, and it was still negotiable. It's like going from like no consistency to like a 1 on a scale of 0 to 10. Like he's just, I don't understand.
What makes you say he can never be a consistent player?
Because he's played the same way for years.
Maybe he's just waited.
It's the award-winning Team Liquid coaching staff is going to.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say maybe all he needed was North America and Team Liquid to make him a consistent player.
All right, I'm gonna get flamed already for just supporting Team Liquid a little bit in this decision, so I'll just put the shirt up already, put it on because I knew this was coming. I will say that like you can argue about whether or not Mickey is a player that they should sign just due to like consistency problems and like does he even speak English and these other concerns that are going to come up.
As far as I know, he does not.
Yeah, I haven't heard. I feel like given that fact that like when you read that interview, they did not stress good English skills. You can probably take that to be that means he does not have good English skills if you're not going to highlight that.
There was so like this is I guess tangentially related. There was a video that someone did where he interviewed a couple of the Africa players last split when they were trying to go to Worlds, and they were kind of this surprising team. And they had Songyun and Snowflower, and they tried to speak English pretty well, and they were like, okay. And Mickey's was not nearly as good, so.
Okay, so yeah, obviously Mickey can't speak English well then, most likely. All that aside, like, given that it is the middle of summer split, you are going to be hard-pressed to find, like, any talent that you would want to import of, like, any caliber. And my guess on the Team Liquid side is just, like, you probably started, like, the process of this acquisition, like, week 3, week 4, when you're, like, getting shit on. You put Slushie, and he sucks ass, too. And you're just like, well, our team blows. Like, what's the worst that could happen by, like, bringing this guy over? We have a mountain of money, so, like, it's not, like, a big cost to us in terms of, like, oh, can we afford to do this? And then, like, if he does come over and perform, great, you can maybe keep him for 2018. And if he sucks and it's just a waste of time, well, great, you guys are getting crapped on anyways. So I can kind of a little bit understand that. I just don't know why they didn't make this move at the start of the split. But we already hit on that a lot about, like, why bring the same 5 players back.
What does this mean for their other imports?
Well, they were saying in the ESPN article that the plan would be to bench Reignover, use Inori, and put Mickey in the mid lane.
Which is, so for me, I would disagree with that decision for a few reasons. But I think the primary one is that Inori himself is not known for being a particularly consistent. Like, it's like having two very reckless players
I mean,
together.
the patch is finally good for Rainover
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And that was like kind of their problem, is they signed this super expensive player allegedly, and he wasn't really like in meta in terms of his champion pool or just what he wanted to do generally. And then now suddenly we get this patch that allows him to play like a ton of tank junglers, and like Gragas, like Fnatic played all those disengaged comps and everything else. They're playing Inori, so it's like they have the same problem all over again. It's good.
I do feel bad for Team Liquid's accountant, because you just like, I love the idea that like Rainover reportedly just like the most expensive by a huge amount player in the LCS, and it's like, yeah, we're just gonna bench him. We're just gonna put him on the sidelines.
One thing I will say, and why I think this patch might be overrated for Rainover, is just because it's a lot of like different tank junglers, and he is not good at picking up new champions, really at all. So like,
Sure.
like yes, he can play Gragas and he can play Olaf, but like, can he play Cho'Gath? Can he play Maokai? Can he play Zac? He's still playing Elise. Like a lot of their wins came on Elise and Gragas, which are like in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's like even his worst problem, to be honest, too. So it's just a really long, complicated issue if you want to get into Team Liquid's jungle situation.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is that like, I don't think it's a surprise that like the first weekend that Team Liquid, or like one of the 2 weekends Team Liquid's actually aggressive, is like when this move has probably been coming for like a while and it's finally confirmed. Like, I don't think the fact that they're actually making moves now as a team is like, oh, they're figuring it out. It's like they're probably just like, fuck it, let's actually make plays, because previously they would get like 3 or K gold leads off punishing an enemy doing something dumb, and then they would just sit there and slowly bleed out. So like, I'm not convinced that like, oh, they figured it out, and now like this is going to hurt their synergy. I think it's like they have synergy now because this move made them not care.
And their wins weren't even like off of improved figuring it out kind of play. It was probably just off of like teams sort of being lulled almost into the sense of complacency. It's like, okay, we're going to push out the lane. We're going to do the, why are they there?
Yeah.
And just and randomly dying. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah, so like I'm not convinced that like the sudden Team Liquid uptick is like even reliable, given the fact that we have a split and a half of them not working out. That like 2 weeks is not going to make me convinced that this is like bad. Now whether or not the Mickey move is a good move is a separate issue, which I'm more on Emily's side about that one.
Okay,
I mean, yeah, I just think it's hilarious that a team that has had problems finding any sort of consistency signs like one of the most inconsistent players I know.
So it sounds like the panel universally feels as though this was a bad or poor or silly decision from Team Liquid.
I think, okay, I'm going to draw a loose connection between something else that happened recently, which was Doctor Who got a new doctor, okay?
Okay. Yeah.
And everyone had a huge outcry, right? Because the doctor was female. But I don't even think that was the thing. And this isn't everyone. It's just some people, like a group of people. And then some of the writers left allegedly because of this decision. I don't even think it was because of the female doctor necessarily, right? I don't even think it was because they made the doctor female. It was because the writing for the Doctor Who series has been so bad for so long that any decision they make, okay, people are instantly just going to question and be like, this seems like you don't understand what's wrong with the show. You don't understand the problems that is going on with the show, and you're just like trying to do something really drastic to make people like happy or to evoke some sort of interest in the show. And it feels similar. It feels like Mickey is the female doctor. So that's and so it feels almost like no matter what decision TL make at this point, people are going to be like, okay, this is going to go poorly, because so far their track record of decisions is really bad, and that's the fundamental problem, not necessarily this particular move. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's another decision in a long line of decisions that shows that I don't think they have any idea of like what is wrong with their team. I just find it, I don't even know if it's I'm not even condemning the decision necessarily. It is just hilarious to me.
Kelsey, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just gonna say like, yeah, they are consistently bad. So go bring in an inconsistent player. Like, who cares? Maybe it works. I think most people have given up on 2017 TL, and like if this gives them a potential option in 2018, like whatever.
Kelsey, how would you fix Doctor Who? Because if we could fix Doctor Who, then we could fix Team Liquid.
I mean, they fired a lot of the writers, but I don't know a lot about the situation. So they fired a lot of the writers apparently, or a lot of the writers left. I'm not clear, but like one of the worst ones apparently is now the showrunner. So, feels like that might not work.
Okay.
We're good.
Well, there goes that plan. All right, so moving on. Patch 7.14 came out, and this was, I know, a very controversial patch. Then they hotfixed some of the lethality stuff, or at least one of the items, and it became a little less controversial, but still, my understanding is controversial. I was best manning at a wedding this weekend, so I was only able to catch one game in person. But what did everyone think after the patch has now hit competitive play?
Oh boy. I mean, whose topic
Yeah.
was this specifically again?
This specifically
This is mine.
is
Okay, I'll
Kelsey's.
let you
guess.
start.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start.
I mean, I guess it's just my question is generally like, what do people even think is this patch? Because it seems like this patch is very ARAM-y, and that's the terminology people have been using. That everyone's like, yeah, but you're not all randoming your champions. The point of saying it's an ARAM patch isn't that they're all randoming their champions. It's that these comps would be good theoretically if you got them in like an ARAM game, because they team fight really well and they're well rounded in their team fight sense. So then you can just like push mid, and people are very afraid to go to the side lane and get side lane control because they're afraid of getting picked off. Everyone is afraid of pushing out the wave mid even on their own to get jungle vision and then going into the jungle, so it's hard to play like pick comps that would theoretically counter some of these like grouping situations or moving to side lanes or anything of that nature. So it's just a really messy thing because of how strong the tank itemization is. Like, I even think we might see more people just willing to first item Bramble Vest in certain situations just because of like how cheap it is, the fact that you get damage back, the fact that so many people are going to be running like hyper carry AD. I don't know. Yeah.
So what do you think the meta will end up being? Because like I've been like just watching NA, almost like the only thing I've watched on it is just like it feels like you said, tanks are super good, and there's been like buffs to support tanks for a while. The buffs to Cinderhulk makes tank junglers good, and then you have the actual buffs to tanks like Cho'Gath and Singed and Maokai and Nunu and whatever else. So like it just feels like tanks are good everywhere right now. And does that mean like you guys think we're just going into like full tank meta 5v5 death ball comps?
Yeah,
no,
go ahead. I already talked a lot, so you should speak.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think what we've seen people try to do is have like at least 1 to 2 points of like either heavy burst damage or like some sort of hyper carry somewhere. Like I think maybe teams will start trying that out more, which I don't know how people feel about that, but typically when you look at tanks come back in meta, you end up with people trying out a lot, like a few more hyper carry comps. We saw some teams try it. It didn't seem like it was really working for a lot of people, but I don't know if that could also just be like poor team fight positioning or something like that. I don't know if you guys think we might see more hyper carries as well, especially in bot lane, which we kind of already were seeing anyway.
Like, some of the hyper carry comps are just really random. Like, UOL went Renekton, Elise, Talon, Kog'Maw, and Sejuani support. And I was just like, okay, this is not going to work, guys. But I think that you kind of have to, because you need something to shred armor, and typically you have long range ADs that can shred armor. You have comps with Sivir, like Sivir does a lot of crit. You have these crit itemizations becoming stronger again. Like one of the big problems with the Duskblade stuff that everyone thought was going to be super good is that when you're in a position where you're like lane swapping with Duskblade AD carries, you end up in switching on the sideline and you can't take the turret faster than the other guy, and then you fall behind in that regard, and then your Duskblade item AD carry isn't as effective as like the crit AD carry later on. So it's a really weird position to be in. So I do think we are going to see a lot of those. I think you can still play, like, I'm probably going to look at some of the games where people were running like 1-4s, and I think you can still play 1-4s. But you have to be smarter about your lane assignments, 1-4s and 1-3-1s. You have to be smarter about your lane assignments. You have to think critically about situations where your duo lane or your mid or whatever will get caught out when you're assigning lanes. So it just becomes harder to execute these comps. But I think you can still play them, and some people will probably try to snowball really hard and overwhelm tanks. But I just think for now, it's just so good. Like, I don't know. It's really easy to play.
I mean, it's really, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I saw, and there's a weird extenuating circumstance with this where one of the teams had to win within a certain amount of time. So there's it's stupid. It's Brazil. I'm actually writing a rant about it. But they had to win in a certain amount of time. So obviously they went for more early game because they basically had to win in 32 minutes, I believe. And they just got outscaled by a team fighting comp. They lost one fight at 15 minutes and the game was over. And to Kelsey's point, like, this was the most kind of obvious example. It's a Cade Stars versus INTZ game 2 from yesterday, for the curious. I know not many people watch Brazil, and I wouldn't even necessarily recommend you watch this game, but it's the most, like, visually obvious example that I've seen of, like, it's so much easier to just run these tank compositions because you can just mash your face into the other team at a certain point, and you will not lose a team fight. And that's just so much easier to do than, because like we've seen teams trying to do, like, I see teams try botch up 1-3-1 and 4-1 all the time just because they don't understand where to apply pressure or how to trade objectives or stuff like that. And if you can have a team composition that's super easy to win with and very successful, and you don't need to think as hard about that kind of stuff, then it's unfortunately the meta is going to shift in that direction. And I think that's what we kind of saw from this week.
So what's weird to me is, like, there's a game like that in NA as well, just P1 versus C9. Like, P1 had triple tank with Sivir, and eventually C9 messed up one fight in the jungle, and then it's over because they just run at them. I think tank comps like snowball super hard because they're so lenient around playing around turrets and dives and stuff like that, as well as having so many engaged tools. And the thing is, like, even though I think, like, everyone on the outside is like, yeah, tanks are probably the best, there's still, like, a ton of teams, at least in NA, running comps that are, like, just out there. Like, okay, you're putting Rumble top early with, like, Jace, like, I don't know what they're doing. Like, Kha'Zix jungle, like, they're full, like, damage comps, and they sometimes win. Like, Echo Fox won a game with, like, this complete, like, the Draven, like, having to snowball really hard against TSM, and they get a couple early kills, and it works. And so, like, there's enough times where I see something that I'm like, that's a dumb draft win. Like, I thought Diggs drafts were really good. They still lost because they played bad, I'm pretty sure. But, like, maybe, you know, us on the outside thinking tanks are just the best. Like, I'm still, I'm almost positive that tank meta is, like, the way to go. But I don't know if it's just because teams aren't on it, or, like, teams know something we don't 100% yet, that, like, people aren't 100% on board.
I think, generally speaking, teams don't like it that much. Like, some teams do. Like, you talk to certain players, they're like, yeah, man, I really love Sivir. But most players are not that player. Or, yeah, man, I really love playing tanks. And, like, I really love that Cho'Gath doesn't even require you to hit your Q anymore because everything is just broken. But some people will be like that, but I think some teams want to play, like, we want to play the Fiora, we want to play the Camille, we want to play the Kha'Zix, and so they'll find ways to do this. Like, I know Splice Like, I also think some of the issue is that when you have a more top focused team, it's like you don't want to play two tanks usually in top and jungle. So you'll see like some teams trying more 1-4. So like UOL, HDK, Misfits, Splice are all examples of teams that will do more stuff like that. But I think that you can do it. It's just harder, and teams will find workarounds. I think some workarounds, like since people are super hard prioritizing like Braum, and you can first item certain supports into, you can first pick certain supports into Braum, or you can pick a ton of supports into Braum, even like a Janna or something like this with Disengage. Maybe like even Morgana or something. I don't know. Then I think that we might see like super high heavy Disengage comps be somewhat successful. Like Gragas, Janna, Sivir comps. I don't know. So I think that there are definitely options. It's just that it's gonna take a bit before people can get to the point where they can reliably execute them, because right now I think Jarvan is like the most broken champion in the game, because he can engage off screen, he's free positioning for your hyper carry AD, and I mean, if you have a strong jungle matchup, he can trade really well in lane. So I don't know. It's fun. It's super fun.
Well, should we move on then? Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Oh no, all I was gonna say is I was surprised because like I don't obviously all of your interviews haven't come out, Kelsey, but like I interviewed a bunch of people on the new patch, and a lot of these are gonna be coming out this week. But I was surprised at how relaxed, I guess, some of the players were. Like some of the players are just like, yeah, it's whatever. So there was kind of, because I started watching the latest patch earlier in the week, and once it got to NA where I was interviewing the players themselves, they kind of seemed very like, there were only one or two that were like, I really don't like this or whatever. They were just kind of like whatever. So I think the shift that we saw maybe didn't seem as drastic to them. I'm not really sure.
I think that's just how pro players are.
To throw that out there just because like their response was pretty.
I feel like that's more and more how pro players are though. Like they don't want to shit talk patches or be seen as complaining about the meta. They just say things like, it's a lot of changes, but it's a lot of opportunity to do something, or as a pro player, that's kind of, it's about adapting, and like this is just one more area we have to adapt. Like you just get a lot of those kind of canned statements, and I don't know.
They didn't even say that. They were just like, oh yeah, this patch isn't even bad compared to, like, no lane swaps, or when I was at 2015 Worlds, that patch was absolutely broken.
Well, this is
a great. Saying is their standards are just like really.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe their standards.
Well, this is
like just a blip on the radar.
This is a great opportunity to move on to the next topic, which is, are patches like 7.14 good for LOL? This is Mark's, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, all I would say is like it is an interesting question to me, because as somebody who is not as analytical or game minded, I know everybody talked about 7.13 as being really, really good, and so I am interested to hear, what something like, I don't know, it's just interesting that it was so disruptive to a patch that people thought was really well balanced.
Yes, so that is the question a little bit. I think like between 7.11, 7.12, and 7.13, it was like slowly getting more and more balanced, but there's multiple perspectives to take, of course. So like from a pro player perspective, or an analyst or a coach, and even like us on the outside, we can bitch and moan a fair amount about the fact that 7.14 just throws everything up in the air that they were working towards for so long, and it felt like they finally hit a nice balance, and they're kind of like, well, we bought some items, we bought some champions out of nowhere, we were reworking stuff. Sounds great, let's go. Here's a new champion as well thrown in there. Kane's a thing that we haven't even talked about yet. Like, so on the one hand, yes, that is very annoying from the pro player perspective, but in terms of on the outside as a viewer, I think like this is one of the best patches to happen, because no one knows what the fuck to ban red side. I was talking to Tony Zixel about this a little bit, and it's like, it feels like after like a week or two on any patch, it's like, well, those are your three standard red side bans. You got LeBlanc, Rengar, Camille, you got Zac, Kate, maybe X, probably Elise. Like, and you get into this thing where it's like, well, here are the OPs, ban that, and then like this patch comes around and no one knows what's OP, no one knows what strats they want to run or like what's the best strat, and I'm sure it'll get ironed out in time. But I do think, given that there's not an international tournament right around the corner, there's a couple weeks towards playoffs, a lot of like the really long-term problems that have come out with some of those other patches was that they happened on playoffs or at Worlds, whereas this one's just kind of towards the tail end of the season and brings a lot of spark to it. I would actually argue overall I'm happy about the 7-14 patch.
It's funny that you say no one knows what to ban red side, because I feel like all the EU teams feel like you either ban what they consider like the 3 OP junglers or 2 of them in Caitlyn, depending on how afraid you are of the enemy bot lane. So it's kind of funny that there is that difference. But there is a really kind of absurd blue side win rate too, though, I think, as a result. I need to double check what it is exactly. But that usually happens when there's a new patch, especially like a really big new patch. So it'll probably even out, and just in general, blue side is stronger. But yeah.
Yeah, super leashing makes, I think, blue side just way better.
Super leashing, and also the way the terrain is set up in terms of like bot dives and skill shots and everything else. So, I think, but usually on a new patch, like blue side gets an even higher win rate just because of the red side stuff, and people haven't figured out counters to like the OPs and. But so yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I don't like it as much because I did feel like 7.13 was a super diverse patch. You could play a bunch of different, people are already finding, like, the thing that bothers me about 7.14, if something bothers me about 7.14, is people already knew tanks were strong, and we're starting to figure out that tanks were strong, right? So this patch is like, okay, then we just buffed tanks that were already being played because Cinder Hulk improvements and other stuff for no reason, and now tanks are gross. And so that's my problem with it. I understand from a spectator, though, this patch is like super fun because everyone feels like they need to fight all the time, and yay. Otherwise, you lose side wave control, so you have to force. Let's go.
In general, I like the previous patch. I don't like it when, and I feel this way about 7.14. So I guess this is my only argument against it. I feel like the ways to win on 7.14 are, or right now anyway, until I guess time, like over time, people figure out other solutions and start being able to execute like a 1-3-1 or a 4-1 to kind of counter these 5v5 comps that we'll probably be seeing. I don't like it when it seems like the easiest strategical option to winning is like the one that's the easiest to execute, I guess, if that makes sense. Just because for me personally, and I'm not the casual spectators just looking for like fight after fight after fight, that gets really boring for me as a viewer. But I also realize that I'm not the target audience. And I actually, one specific player that I interviewed this week was like, oh yeah, this is like, I know for a fact this is great to watch because everyone is just fighting and everyone loves that. Moon, actually. It'll come out in an interview. He didn't say it in like a derogatory way at all. He actually really likes the patch. So. Yeah,
he's been playing Cho'Gath. But so what's interesting is we talk about 7.13's diversity, and I know 7.14 is like new and different. But the thing is, because there's so many things that were changed, like people thought Duskblade was going to be strong, so you saw like some people have like Jace priority and Kha'Zix and stuff like that. And I think there was something like partway through Saturday, there were 50 unique champion picks in NA, whereas on all of 7.13 there was like 46. So like in a day and a half, they had more champion picks on 7.14 in NA than they had.
Now, do we think that will continue with this patch? Because if so, that's great to hear.
Well, it's hard to say because you could just end up with like, okay, well, Cho'Gath, Mao, Zac are like super ridiculous tanks, and then you also have like Gragas and whatever else, and Poppy's even being played, so who knows? And if it stays, great, but that's the thing is if 7.15 rolls around, you can hit some of the things that got overpowered. So like having bigger patches, whereas like 7, 11, 12, and 13 were like slowly working towards that thing, and each patch didn't really feel that different. Whereas like 7.14 feels very different.
Yeah.
I kind of like slow patches because I think we got to a point in 7.13 where it was. And I don't mean diverse in picks, like everyone assumes. I mean diverse in picks, which is not necessarily true. And there's definitely a strong correlation between diversity in picks and diversity in how you play the game. But just like people were arguing whether or not you just have to build these like late game 1-4 comps, or you can play these 1-3s, or you can like snowball super hard early, or you have to go with scaling hyper carries and tanks, and now it feels like people are arguing less, I guess, but we'll see over time what happens, because maybe, and I hope this, because like I liked that people were starting to have these debates more, that will come back again once people get over the knee-jerk, oh my god, we can't deal with these tanks reaction.
Tyflo Hawk
I think
in chat says the tank diversity is good, but it's only tanks.
That's just, I mean, like maybe it ends up being only tanks, but that's horribly wrong for right now because we saw Fiora taken into like an all bruiser tank team comp, seeing Camille's
Fiora
Rumbles.
is historically like kind of good against tanks, but
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Is like you can counterpick them.
It's just hard to do. It's just hard to execute the 1-4 is I think the problem that people have with it. So like you can have some success, but it's harder to do.
Well, what ended up happening in that game was actually the Fiora like almost never split, and she just TP'd into fights and played cleanup duty. Yeah.
I saw that, but I think she got ahead super early because I don't think you can really do that unless you get, if I can remember that game correctly.
Yeah, she got dove and turned it for a
kill. Yeah.
Sorry, Emily, you were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I guess this is an old-timey rant that I've had for a while, and I haven't brought it up in a while, and I don't think I've ever brought it up on League Weekly, so I'll go for it here. I think one thing that's kind of frustrating to me since about, I would say, and I have to actually run the math on this, I did once and I like lost the numbers. I think when I switched jobs once. I lost the numbers because it's on like a Google account that I can't access anymore. But basically, when the frequency of like patches like this that have very large like itemization changes and champion changes are more frequent, it gives less time for people to think and stew about how to come up with different like creative compositions. So if there's anything that I have like just as a blanket remark against Riot's patching since about like 2015, it's that I understand that they're introducing new patches to try to make it more exciting for viewers or try to make it more exciting for people playing the game, not even watching esports, but like just playing the game in general. But that frustrates me because I really like it when a meta does have like just really small tune-ups throughout. And the general object is to watch teams like continuously try to figure things out. So like when you have something that's really, really strong and you actually give teams time to solve that problem, other stuff becomes really strong. And then like so on and so on and so on. And I haven't felt that way about League of Legends actually since about 2014. And it's not about saying that, oh, like, because I know people's response is always like, 2014 had some weird broken shit in it, and it totally did. Like, I'm not arguing. Every single season has had weird broken shit. But I do think that more recent patches have been slightly closer together, and the like shifts themselves have been more drastic. And I do wish, and I feel like what we kind of had with 7.11 through 7.13, if I'm remembering the patching correctly, was that like there was a gradual evolution of the meta to the point where teams were starting to like kind of rotate through different team compositions to try to beat other team compositions. And you don't get that with a higher frequency of larger patches.
I think to an extent that's true. Like, for example, the example I use doesn't even go back to 7.14. It's just last year's Worlds. We had one patch per month, and the bot lane meta changed a lot from week to week to week. We had like Alistar, and then people were playing Misfortune at the end. So I think that's like people figure stuff out. So I'm always like a little. That's why I've been sort of conservative in saying like I hate this patch or you only play tanks, because I do think that people figure stuff out and it'll be cool to see. But yeah, that's so to an extent I agree with you, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I just want them to be able to be given the time to do so.
Like in general,
and again, this is like a tangentially related rant because I feel like people often aren't given that time.
That's the only thing that I really do have against this patch that I think I already said was just that tanks were already strong and people already knew tanks were strong on 7.13. And people were playing more tanks, and then the tank buff comes. It just feels like that people weren't paying attention to that aspect as much, or it didn't have as much time to breathe in that regard. So that's like the one thing that I really kind of dislike about it. But
I feel like they were trying to offset some of the tank buffs with like, hey, lethality's getting buffed too. Like, sure. You'll get different stuff. And it ended up like in solo queue, everyone just plays lethality shit and it's really annoying. And then like in competitive, everyone just builds tank. We'll have to see that's actually how it develops. I like what they did a lot between 7.11 and 7.13, but I wouldn't want that to be like how they always patch. I think like a mix between 7.14 patching and like 7.11 through 7.13 would be like ideal, especially.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, and that's why I like preseason, because you have the giant patch, and then I would like half of a season to spread out, but I don't know. That might not be ideal for everyone.
So. All right, so go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say, I think like I like the preseason, the midseason. I wouldn't want those to be the only two big updates, because then you're getting like 15 weeks of pro league with like minor tweaks, and I would rather see like one more big patch at an appropriate time per split.
7.14, as we've been discussing. I think people still aren't really sure what the meta is going to turn out to be, but we have some ideas. And obviously, as soon as you have those types of ideas, you can start to wonder what or who are going to be the best teams. This is a question for Mark. Or let's see your question.
Yeah. So kind of continue on with this, assuming that like we've talked about the tank meta is what we expect. Not sure if it'll always be that way, but assuming that like in each region respectively, who does this help the most?
China.
Yeah, deathball comps just run into each other. Might help Europe, right? They just like grouping mid and fighting if you're UOL. Maybe they get a big buff from it.
That's the really funny thing, is because UOL is the one that's like, I think they're just trying to be hipster at this point, because the patch comes out and they're the ones playing like Renekton, Elise, Talon suddenly. It's like, okay, this is cool.
You were handed this patch.
So which teams do you think in like each respective region does it help? Because like for NA, I think it helps TSM a lot. Not like yet, because they're historically like kind of slow about learning stuff. But if it does stay on like more tank heavy team comps, I feel like with Doublelift and Bjergsen as like your late game carries with Haunter initiating and all that jazz, it works out pretty well for everyone on that team, aside for a little bit of Biofrost and Sven maybe.
Okay, so TSM in North America, does Emily and Kelsey, do you agree with that?
I think.
I mean, it definitely wasn't reflected in this.
All right, but that's more of a symptom of like, you guys aren't playing Cho'Gath or Maokai.
Yeah, Parth admitted that the patch had fucked him up, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I think to an extent they were getting a lot out of like roam mid stuff, and those are kind of good. But I think we're going to. There's more, might be more of an emphasis on like bot going to mid, and I'm not sure if Biofrost is like super tight on that aspect yet. He was kind of like the leader of doing it in NA, but then I think a lot of NA teams got better at it. I also think that they are like a team that wants to trade for top and bot in certain situations, and this makes it a little bit harder to trade for top, in my opinion. So I don't know. Maybe it's good for them because they can play like the super bot hyper carries, and Doublelift looked really strong on Tristana. But for some reason, I'm not 100% on them. Like, I also think it's like the jungle invade thing, because we're seeing a lot more junglers just be like, yeah, we're going to fight over control wards in river and not necessarily be super aggressive about this, but we'll see.
It'll be bad for Biofrost if people can keep picking Blitzcrank.
Is that a comment somewhere in chat, or is that your insight?
That's my insight. Just wanted to throw it out there.
I think it's pretty good for C9 actually, because I think a lot of the supports that you might see coming back and are obviously playmaking, like what people think of as playmaking CC melee supports were already on their way back anyway. But I think that does help Smoothie a lot since he likes to roam and Sneaky is a pretty reliable AD carry to leave in lane. I think it really helps them because typically they did like to team fight late game anyway. So it plays kind of into what I think their default would probably be if you had to like pinpoint a default for this specific C9 team. So I don't know. That was the team that came immediately to mind, even though I agree with, was it Travis that said this earlier or Mark, that Dignitas looked like the most prepared going into this week for this patch?
Not me.
Yeah, I mentioned that, but that was like, it's the difference between like who's this patch best for once everyone figures out versus like Dig does really crazy shit all the time and they got the lead on this one.
Yeah, and I don't think that I think that a lot of things will change in the coming week. Like, I doubt that people will keep leaving Maokai up against Dignitas, for example, because if you look at Sumday's history at all, at a glance whatsoever, you'll realize that that's actually a really good champion for him. Not that Maokai is a particularly difficult champion to play mechanically, but just because it allows his natural teamfight targeting to come through in a way that he doesn't even, like... And I don't know, obviously he's probably better at communicating with the team now, because there's always like the trouble with just basic language communication on hybrid rosters, but like it actually allows him to lead team fights visually without any sort of communication, like naturally.
Okay, there's one thing I have to ask.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I don't.
This is like not related at all to anything. It's just like in my head. I remember watching one of the games and hearing Jat say that he thinks that like Cho'Gath is better in the jungle because he doesn't think it's that good in lane. And it needs follow-up CC, so it's better to have a top laner that can engage, and then a jungle Cho'Gath. Like, I was wondering if this is the general NA sentiment, or just that.
I've only talked to 2 or 3 people about Cho'Gath top, and they generally think it doesn't lose lane. Like, if you play it right, like it's impossible to beat in lane. Like, it might not snowball on you, but if you just like bitch out the first 3 levels, eventually your QE just like clears waves and you have too much sustain.
And maybe I misheard him say that part, but I definitely know that he said that he thinks it's better jungle. So I just thought it was interesting because my general understanding is that like every time I see Cho'Gath play, his like range is super good, like his trades are super good, his like he's good in lane, and most people in EU actually think that he's much better top than jungle. So I just thought that was interesting, and I was kind of curious if like this was a general, like most people think Cho'Gath is good in jungle.
A couple of comments from the chat. Elo Green says that he believes the patch helps G2 a lot because it works with Trick's comfort picks.
Sure. I mean, in EU, I think like it's good for G2. It's good for Misfits because even though Misfits have really poor understanding of the game, they can group and like just engage and kill. I think it should be good for Splice because Trashy is really comfortable on a lot of these jungle picks. It's a similar reason why G2 it's good for G2. It's good for I think that those are most of the teams in EU that it's really good for.
Okay, so Mokies in Twitch chat says...
Oh, and Rocket.
Says, I think it will give Immortals a bigger edge out of every NALCS team because they've been already winning with team play, and now it's just 10 times easier.
I mean, Flame for me is the one thing, because I feel like... But I think that it's not that big of a deal. He can still play really strong laning champions. And they can still... And Cody Sun can play like these hyper carries, and it's fine.
Yeah, he looked pretty good on the Jhin outside of a few, like...
The Jhin thing is still I'm not 100% on.
Yeah.
And then Chino Boy 14 wants to know which teams the tank meta will fuck over.
I actually think it might not be good for CLG, just because like Darshan has been having like one of his best splits ever in terms of like individual carry performance on a lot of different things. And if it ends up in a situation where it's like, all right, you are mostly playing tanks and like your Fiora gets banned, so you can't counter that. Like I think that could hurt him potentially. And he was a big threat with like Dardoch always going up there and snowballing the top side of the map, and then you just end up with like dive bottom repeatedly. And I don't think CLG has always been particularly good at that.
I think CLG is not that good. I think it is actually might have a bad impact on H2K for reasons that like they're traditionally good at 131. I wouldn't say that they rely on their bottom lane a whole lot. It's good for UOL if they actually play it, but they seem to not want to actually play it. So I guess in that sense, it's bad for them.
All right. Moving on from 7.14 after spending 45 minutes talking about it.
Travis doesn't want to talk about the actual game anymore.
It's just a long time to spend on one topic. All right. Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, was this you? No. Emily. Sorry, Kelsey. You'll get your time in the spotlight, I promise. Emily wants to talk about the idea of a flawless team using SKT and TSM, I believe, as examples.
So this is kind of a hard shift away from what we've been talking about. I'll try to transition as well as I can. Basically, this is something that I had for last week if we had done the show, just because, but I think it also applies to this week. It's the way people, so like when TSM came back from Rift Rivals, suddenly they came back, and the first like narratives, I guess, to hit the ground running in North America that week was like TSM was suddenly this best team and they have no flaws whatsoever. And I also see the same thing a lot, and I know there's a lot of comparisons between the two just because of their dominance in their respective regions. But until recently, when they started failing a lot, I see the same thing with SKT, where like people kind of tend to gloss over their flaws and not bring them up just because they are a top team. So I guess like, am I just crazy and people didn't do this with TSM when they came back from Rift Rivals? Or I don't know. Like, I just want to urge people to find the flaws in all. Like, maybe this is a negative topic. I urge people to find the flaws in all of their teams.
You trying to shit talk TSM, Emily?
I mean, I think there's a way that all teams can lose, and I feel like that's really important to address when you're talking about a team.
Turns into my Twitter, and everyone thinks you're an angry alcoholic that hates everything.
Are you saying TSM are a bunch of losers?
Exactly.
I'm saying that when you when the time comes that a top team does start losing, like for example, SK Telecom, like maybe you want to take a look at some of those flaws previously, so then when teams do start beating them, maybe it makes a lot more sense to you. And I'm not even saying like I wrote a bunch of stuff on SKT, and who knows, I could be like way off base. But I think like addressing teams' flaws even while they're winning is important.
Escapee1 in Twitch chat says, quote, "Your favorite band is so overrated, I wish you could see it."
Cool.
Kind of playing off the idea that, you're just...
Yeah. I think it depends on like where you are in the season that you see people glossing over potential weaknesses, because I feel like for world story building, you hear about like SKT is the best team in the world, but if there's one way to beat them, you could potentially look at blah, 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 and then like they go on their like little rant about.
You
like,
suddenly got very nasally there. Were you?
Yeah, I don't know who that was. That was just like a generic nerdy kind of analyst voice. That wasn't anyone specific, but I feel like I do hear a lot of those kind of like kind of.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was trying to angle it, and I was like, who is Mark unintentionally throwing shade at right now?
Yeah. But I feel like you hear a lot more of that at postseasons and stuff like that than you hear during the regular season, where people are more often along for the ride and want to do like a lot of hype building. So like oh my god, TSM smashing everyone. They look really, really good. Are they, the best team in NA? And then like you often don't get that much in-depth coverage of like what they do bad.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that after Rift Rivals 2, it was like everyone was super excited, and that was more of a pseudo-patriotic or regional pride thing, and people didn't want to hear about like TSM's flaws that much. So I think that kind of makes sense. So yeah.
I mean, I think another interesting comparison is TSM going into, and like I was just as guilty of this as anyone. So I guess maybe it's something that like I'm trying to find in my own analysis when I look at teams. So like TSM going into Worlds last year, right? I think because they were so successful and because their narrative was one of dominance, I felt like I didn't find the flaws that eventually led to their downfall. And now looking back, I can be like, oh, that's so obvious, but like it definitely wasn't obvious at the time. So I guess I just want to urge people to kind of dig deeper to find weaknesses in top teams.
I think
I was just gonna say, I think it also is kind of dependent on like, especially for TSM last season, was just that they were so dominant that like teams were not exposing them super well during the regular season. And like if you looked really, really closely, you could like hypothetically come up with some of those situations, but it wasn't like, oh, this team consistently lost this way, even though they were 18 and like 3. The 3 losses all had this like one common thread in them. It like TSM was just too dominant for that to become like. So like I feel like that it kind of depends on like, oh, well, they're the number 1 team right now in CLG, but like this thing happens and they lose a lot of skirmishes, and sometimes their jungler just kills himself and it seems really random. I felt like for that TSM team, it did seem very specific to the fact that they were so good in the region.
I think to an extent though, you could see stuff like, I mean, when they were playing, when I went back, it was like, oh, their bot lane almost literally never goes mid and stuff like this sometimes. But again, it's like a retrospect thing, and people were riding the high, and it's like, yeah. So I think you can definitely see flaws of teams even when they're being really, really dominant. It's just that people don't think about it critically because of internal biases and stuff like this. So this is all, but I always like to maintain the narrative that you can gauge teams internationally. You can gauge teams even when they're really, really strong. I don't like the idea that you can't, even when they're just because they're super dominant, because I feel like you should be able to, So that's where I sort of stand on the issue. I think that, for example, there is also like the meta factor, where it's kind of hard to predict how meta will affect teams. With SKT, yeah. I've always kind of maintained that Wolf is overrated, in part because historically he hasn't been able to play like a lot of these engaged champions outside of Alistar maybe. And now we're in a meta where he's not able to play the mage champions as much, and SKT are like stubbornly playing mage champions. So I think you have to have a long memory sometimes also. So it is hard, but I think it's possible. It's probably the
solution is that Wolf needs to play Janna.
I mean, he can. Coin is really good.
I'm actually not even kidding. That's actually my solution.
That's one like slightly underrated thing, just because it's a little bit hard to play these champions because of all of the tank engaged champions. Is that Coin is actually stupid good right now. So
you guys are both writers, and Mark does videos. Why don't you guys do a video or an article that's just as quote Elo Azento says, TSM has glaring flaws, as the video or headline?
I think, well, so there's, like, let's take the current landscape of the competitive scene. Like, right now, there's no top team really in a lot of regions. Like, who's the top team in NA? Who's the top
TSM.
team in Korea? But they're not.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, like, that's the thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because, like, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring up this topic, because I feel like all the teams that are like top right now in Korea, like I can think of so many flaws for them, and people were always super critical of every team that wasn't SKT until SKT like started failing. So now the end result is that people are still, in my opinion, fairly critical of, or I guess maybe it's just like I'm pretty critical and the people I know are pretty critical of the top teams that are still in Korea. Like Samsung still has a lot of problems. Longzhu still has a lot of problems. KT are like, I keep telling people they're a bundle of problems, and yet, you know, they usually win series anyway. So I think that is like the result of not having a top team is that you do get a lot more fair representation of the like teams that fill that vacuum, all of their strengths and weaknesses.
I think part of the problem with me last year, though, when we were talking about like TSM and EDG as these super top teams, right? I even like was really critical of a lot of EDG's problems, but I didn't anticipate like how much they like I anticipated most of their problems, but I didn't really anticipate like how hard they would get hit by them, just because I had this feeling that there were a lot of problems with teams everywhere, you know? So it was like hard to say specifically, even if TSM and EDG look super dominant and you can still see flaws, of course, like you can of course still see flaws in their play. Like how do I know? It's hard to definitively feel like this team will know how to exploit it, or this, if like an entire region of teams playing against these teams haven't been able to exploit them or haven't been able to figure out this flaw, then it's hard to have confidence that a team from another region who's had a similar like, oh my god, I'm so good in these areas and I've been dominating, will also be able to like exploit some of the flaws of this other team. So it's a little bit difficult in that regard as well.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it's like you have to really put yourself out there as like this analyst to say like this is this team's problems, this is 100% you know why like they could lose, and then like you know there's a lot of factors, like you said, the patch is different, you haven't seen these teams play each other, they have their own problems, and it's like you can hypothetically talk about things like, oh man, TSM just they snowball really hard and they go bottom, and that's like their game plan and that's how they play. And like the thing is like that's a play style choice. Like you don't know if like that's just like they're going to be able to do that on the world stage too. So like you can say that that's a problem, and then you don't really have great data to be like that this is a legitimate problem.
I don't want to go too off topic here, but as we're discussing there not being too many top teams in different regions, or at least there being a lot of contesting for who's the top team, do we think that this is a good sign for Worlds, which I know is still a bit away, that we might have much closer competition?
I think it's kind of like the guilty or innocent until proven guilty or whatever, where it's just like I assume Korea is going to shit on everybody until that doesn't happen.
Okay. And
because I talked about Korea last year, and like when I watched the playoffs and like KT won did well in the playoffs and then didn't make it, and then I watched the finals and I was like, okay, the fifth game was decided off some like random 50-50 Baron where GP thinks stole it and Kuro is using Taliyah and like has the worst Taliyah walls I've ever seen. I was like, I think Korea might be overrated a little bit this year. And then like, you know, lo and behold, they go there and they shit on everybody. So it's one of those things where like I've seen Korea at times where I'm not like super in love with their play, and they still come out just fine. So I'm a little bit more on the back foot.
Yeah.
I think the thing about Samsung and SK Telecom in particular, I won't say this as much about teams like KT that haven't changed, I don't think, all season or whatever, but they're just really good at adapting. Like, whenever you see, oh yeah, SKT had these glaring flaws, as soon as they lose because of them, like almost the next time you see them, and this hasn't happened yet, so maybe that's a bigger warning sign, but as soon as they lose because of them or something like this, they come back and they don't have them anymore. And I don't know why they're able to do this, but it's almost infuriating to make predictions about them because of it. Samsung were very similar. Like, if you look at their warding patterns in the C9 series and then compare them to like their warding patterns in the H2K series, they're actually insanely different. So I think that that's something that's really interesting about these teams.
All right, moving on to Kelsey's topic, I believe. One versus all Fnatic's problems.
So this was something that I kind of knew has been going on, but that I was surprised that Fnatic are now willing to talk about it a little bit more, which is that as a team for a lot of the split in particular, Reckless has just kind of been secluding himself and not being part of the team discussion and not doing it, and then kind of like saying things like, I play these champions, right? Coming into discussions like, I play these champions, you have to play around me.
So he's the Forgiven of this year's EU LCS.
Yeah. It's similar, so this is why
he's
I'm bringing
become
it up.
what he hated the most.
So I play these champions, and then the team has discussions without him, and it's like, okay, we have this input, like, how do we play around it in this regard? And that was happening for a while, and then after Rift Rivals, he went home to Sweden, and the team had a discussion, and he came back and we're like, we're not doing this anymore. And so they started to change. But the question is, like, when you have a team like that, what are some ways that you solve it?
Mark, if you were still coaching and you had a team like that, what would you do?
I mean, it's a little hard to say from the outside without knowing the dynamic.
Well, yeah.
Because, like, as
obviously,
a coach,
I'm not saying
Yeah.
Fnatic specifically. We kind of have two examples on the table that are very different, so you can kind of just, like, speculate a little bit, like, some of the stuff that... Yeah.
Right, so, like, let's say, the coach doesn't have as much sway in the team as, Reckless, because Fnatic has talked with him as, like, upper management. They're like, yeah, you're the star guy, you're, like, a face of the franchise, these kinds of things, like, we have these stipulations in your contract, and the coach is like, you need to play Caitlyn, and you need to learn this, and he doesn't do it. When you butt heads, something usually has to give, and if Fnatic has given Reckless more clout behind him, then, like, you're the one who kind of has to give. And I'm sure, you could kind of put an ultimatum to like the team, or like, and by I say the team, I mean like upper management, or like the four other players, like, listen, like, we can't play with this guy, we need him benched, or like we're gonna like all quit or whatever. But short of like ultimatums, if one guy's just being very obstinate and he has the organization behind him, there's not much you can really do, honestly. It is tough.
I think it's an easy question because, like, H2K's probably actually did a reflections type thing where he, like, everyone praises H2K's, like, early game macro and how they used Forgiven to rotate to lanes, and then he did this, like, reflections where it's like, we had to play like that. I actually don't think early game is that good. We just had to play like that because Forgiven was like that. And it's like, so it's kind of amusing to me because you can find ways and be really successful around, like, certain points. And I think maybe with AD carry, that might be this position where it's the most possible, because assuming that it's not like all I play is Kennen, then you can kind of maneuver this guy and just, like, use him as kind of a chess piece almost. He's like an input, and then you kind of move around this part in the map. Because I think theoretically also teams with certain limitations can be more successful because they have to kind of be more creative about how they solve their problems and how they do things. And so some of the best teams have had very obvious problems that gave them an identity and they played around it. So
Right, so someone was mentioning Piglet in chat, and I think it was like a very different situation where the problem with Piglet was not like, I'm obstinate about the champions I want to play. It was like, you do not work within this team well. So we benched him and brought in Keith, and then we won a bunch with Keith. And it's like, clearly our team's fine, and like this, like, they didn't play different champions or anything like that. It was just like, you have to start communicating and not getting mad and like blah blah blah, whatever problems there were. It was not like champion pool related. Whereas like your example with Forgiven and Reckless does feel much more like, we play this style, play around us, and that can be a strength at times and obviously a weakness.
Yeah, I think the player themselves, so like to use Piglet as an example, from what I understand, it's more about like using resources well. So Piglet is the type of player who, like, if you aren't giving him resources and you're giving them to someone else on the team, for example, that person has to do really well with those resources. Otherwise, Piglet will think that maybe they should have gone to him because obviously he could have done better. And like, I don't know how familiar people are with Piglet when he was on SK Telecom, but there was actually, he had a player with him in lane that would just be like, stop it. And he was basically Piglet's handler to some extent. And if you've ever watched, like, there used to be, I don't know if they're still up on YouTube, but there used to be like these like videos of them playing solo queue together to practice, and it would just be like, Piglet would be like, I did this awesome thing, all right, awesome, and Pumondy is just like, yeah, okay, like, whatever. Kind of making sure that he gets like enough praise not to go crazy, but also not like trying to feed his ego. And that's a really delicate balancing act, and I think like SKT is also an example of an organization that has a very strong coaching structure, where the coaches and the analysts of the team do command authority. And you know, there's an obvious shift from when he left that team to when he came to North America. So I don't know if like the Piglet comparison is really an entirely different situation in my opinion. Yep. But I think it's an interesting like example for comparison, I guess, because like in Reckless's case, and specifically thinking of AD carries, like there have been teams that have come up with really fantastic creative strategies around AD carries that weren't even necessarily being obstinate, they just sucked and they couldn't play.
Flash Wolves.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Flash Wolves had like some of the most creative
unicorns of love
minion pushes and stuff like that, because ML was just so bad, and he could only play like Ezreal at Jinx. Like a professional level. I mean, Jinx is still, in my opinion,
that's more on, yeah.
Yeah, that was more on, yeah. And there's one more AD carry.
Oh yeah, I was thinking on, wasn't I? Whoops.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, so I think I do agree with Kelsey's sentiment that AD carry specifically, because it is kind of a separate role in some regards, is a little bit more easy to manipulate if you do have a team. Like the rest of the team themselves have to be really flexible, and they also have to work really well together, which again is like that was the Flash Wolves thing, right? Is that their communication is really, really good, and they're able to be flexible because Maple and Karsa are so good together. So like I think the other problem, or not necessarily problem, but like if you're looking at a checklist of like how you could manipulate and like move around an AD carry, like for Given, I think the rest of the team has to be pretty flexible. And that year, H2K, the rest of the team was able to kind of flex themselves around it. And there was a similar thing with Flash Wolves, where they were able to communicate well enough that they could come up with these creative strategies and workarounds.
Very good. Well, hey, I think we're wrapped up with that topic, which also brings us to the final moments of the show as we take in the anime pick of the week, as well as some questions from chat. So, Emily Rand, before we get into the questions from chat, and while I've decided to move this before questions because it gives the chat time to queue up questions, do you want to give us your anime pick of the week?
Yeah, so my anime pick of the week is actually something that's super popular, and I don't think I've mentioned before, but it's really in the second season and the like ending parts of first season. It's really beginning to hit its stride. It's called My Hero Academia.
I've heard of that.
You can watch it on Crunchyroll. I think like so many players watch it, actually.
Yeah.
Like the players that are into anime, I'm pretty sure watch it. But it's a really good show. It's a very standard shonen show, but if you like,
what is shonen again?
Kind of like long running.
Naruto.
Yeah,
Naruto.
like basically comics for boys. It's like what you would probably.
Why has it got to be
like
for boys?
General superhero comics, because that's actually what shonen means.
Okay.
It's marketed towards boys. But yeah, I mean, it like that doesn't mean all audiences can't love it. But anyway, My Hero Academia is really fun.
Her
it's
facial
like
expression when she said that.
It's fun. It's a fun show to watch.
Okay.
It's fun. I think the show's overrated as shit. I'm on the other end of the spectrum here. Just because I feel like it's the most bog standard anime, but it has the greatest character design ever, and people just like look over everything else about it.
Oh, look, pretty animation. I wonder why Emily likes it.
That's fair. Ocean has some awesome animation.
Like it.
Yeah, it looks really good and it's fun for sure.
Ovely in the chat says, My Hero Academia. Yeah, Emily, my girl. But in all caps, with much more enthusiasm than I was able to convey. Just very excited about that. All right, so questions from chat. Elo Green, please, or PKs, says, why does LGD keep disappointing everyone?
So you know how we complain about like Team Liquid not knowing what they're doing and potentially having like incompetent people deciding things who are like clearly confused about what's going on with the team? Like that's basically LGD. So just goes to show that even if you have like super good players, doesn't necessarily mean anything if you don't know what you're doing overall. So it's kind of how I feel. It's really funny because people like I think someone posted the LPL MVP rankings, and the jungler Aimee is second overall in LPL MVP ranking, and I didn't even realize that. I was like, that's really random. So people who see that probably think, okay, so historically as LGD fans, we've just blamed the jungler. So who do we blame now? I don't think Aimee's. I don't think Aimee's that good, but I do think that like you shouldn't necessarily blame the jungler. It's just the team is. They do a lot more interesting and creative stuff. Mid wins a lot more consistently. I don't know.
All right. Dun198 says, who's going to win the LCK game today, SSG or KT, and why? It is also the first game that LCK is on patch 7.14.
Yeah.
SSG.
Why?
Yeah.
For that very reason.
It's a good patch for them, especially since they've been playing Ambition a lot more. I think I don't see KT doing well in this patch, actually. I know like we didn't really go over Korea and like who the patch would help and who would hurt. But I actually think it helps Samsung and it hurts KT.
Mm-hmm.
And KT
I think
have
it also
not.
hurts Longju.
Yeah, KT have not
Unpopular
like
opinion.
changed at all. By the way, they still have like the same issues. So even though like historically there's been this rock paper scissors thing where KT lose to SKT, but they always beat Samsung. That's like kind of their corner of it. I think this will probably be one of the losses they have against Samsung for that reason. But I am also like, so I guess if you're a KT fan, like I am also a KT fan and I always shit on them because it makes me super critical of all of their weaknesses. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask because
I think it hurts both KT and Longju actually, which is a little bit sad. But we'll see. Maybe if any team has a solution to the tank meta, it will be KT or Longju probably, because I feel like they'll be very obstinate and like
Con likes
to play
4-1.
These 4-1s, and he'll play like things just to get good counter lane matchups, and he's really bad at flanking, so they need to cover that up somehow. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
All right. LOL Azento says, what's everyone's opinion on P1 Ryu taking a vacation before playoffs? Is it fair to his teammates, or is it a just move to do?
I mean, this answer is obviously going to go like with that big asterisk that's like, as long as nothing's mentally health wrong, like a family member didn't die, there's none of these like obviously big extenuating circumstances, because like Matt on TL had panic attacks for a while and he's like, I can't play, I'm just like freaking out on stage and I'm not playing well, take me out, which is like a situation where I agree with that. But if it's just like what I've heard, it's like just he doesn't want to play, he doesn't like the team or something, then it's absolutely ridiculous. And I agree with like Dominate's tweets where he was kind of calling him out. I didn't read all of them, so maybe he said something I don't agree with, but I agree with the overall
You
idea
have to
where
be
it's like,
careful when you say.
yeah, I have to be
agree with
careful.
Dominate's tweets.
I agree with Dominate
Yeah.
and everything he's ever said.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. But I do agree with the overall sentiment that's like, dude, it's your job. You just have to sack up and play like 4 more weeks for them, and like you're your best option. Like we saw how they looked with Pyrion. It was god awful, and I actually don't think Pyrion's god awful, but he went to like a bad team environment. Like I'm sure all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way that you could say that it would not be fair is if the like team atmosphere was so bad with Ryu that bringing Pyrion in would like Pyrion's a really upbeat, positive player, so maybe like that would help. But obviously, it didn't really reflect in any sort of like wins this week. So,
and Ryu is a player who's like the performance of his team, I think, affects him a lot individually. Like he gets super easily discouraged by stuff like that, which may not be fair, but it's just like if the team is performing poorly or if one of the sidelines are performing poorly, then Ryu is definitely just going to be bad. So Pyrion might just be a better example anyway.
2 similar questions, and we'll use these to wrap up the question section. Zer088 says, why does Dardoch look so bad on CLG? And Cryptosia says, what is going on with CLG jungle?
For the first half of that, I wouldn't even necessarily say Dardoch is playing god awful. Like I think he's.
yeah, I don't think he is at all.
I think he's not at all performing at the highs we've ever seen him perform at, but he's just the same. Like he's like a lesser version of the same player in some sense. Where like when he would throw before, he would like hard throw, and you would lose the game solely because of him. And then when he went off, you would like hard win the game because of him. And like you saw in the first game of their second series, where like he made 2 good ganks to get flashes in lanes, and then he was trying to play around mid lane and got jumped on and killed twice. And like it was still a close to winnable game. He played out after like from behind decently for the most part. It's just like he's not taking over games like he used to, probably because he's working within CLG's system a little bit more, and he's also not hard feeding. He's just a more controlled player overall, but I don't know. That's my take.
And then what is going on with their jungle? Why are they doing all this Omar stuff and all that?
I mean, I don't know if you wanted if you wanted an analytical, like purely analytical, not and this would only apply to this week, so I guess it probably wouldn't work. But like, they might want to bring Omar in on 7-1-4 if they feel like Dardoch isn't as comfortable on a tank champion that they might want to play. That's the only like analytical reason I can think of, other than like just having a breath of fresh air on the team in terms of like mentality. And I think that's where you like never know about what is going on with the team internally.
Mark, what are the non-analytical reasons that you would play Omar?
I mean, is it just baiting me to say that Dardoch in his history has been pretty toxic to his team environment?
Baited. Got it. Did it.
But I don't know if that's the case, because I mean, I actually do think that like there could be a situation where like you lose a game and Dardoch gets mad and you're like, all right, put in Omar just because you can't win with him like upset, but he's still not like a huge, cancer to the team in the sense where he's like destroying your team practice. So I still say like in some senses like even if Dardoch is completely under control and not a problem on the team, he himself might internally tilt, and then Omar could be a solution for that, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Was it against FlyQuest? Was that the first series where they played Omar? I'm trying to remember. Was the game the last
week? It was
week?
A Friday. Yeah, it was a Friday series. I think it was. Hang on, let me double check. Yes, it was their 2-0 against FlyQuest.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember it being really weird where he was on Twitter. It's like, there's absolutely nothing wrong for just playing Omar God. But I do remember, like, the first game, it was weird because even though I felt like it made sense compositionally and in terms of, like, the way the map was set up for him to play more on bot, and then, like, top kind of went nowhere, and then their TP plays were weird, and then, like, Omar immediately goes mid, which makes sense to me in game 2 in terms of that gameplay and that flow, and then the whatever weird Belcots thing they were doing. And then so like the game just like opened up much better, and it just went better, and there was much more interaction between him and Afro. And this was just like the first two games, so it was weird to me that the team seemed to flow a little bit better with Omar God, but I don't know if that's anything. And then like I think it was this week where he was playing like the Rengar, Dardoch, yeah.
Dardoch played Rengar, yeah, twice.
Yeah. And then, yeah, because that was the game that Mike Young was casting. And it was a weird comp that was like around where he had to engage as Rengar. And it just seemed, it was really weird compared to the second comp they played, I guess. So, I don't know. I guess they're trying some different things, maybe, is the best way to put it. That would be another analytical, quote-unquote, analytical, or without wanting to say that there might be internal problems, and they might just be like on Twitter, like, there's no internal problems at all. This is not suspicious. Why would we say that? But yeah, I have no idea.
All right. Well, that's the show. Shout out some plugs here at the end, starting with Kelsey. What do you want to throw out there?
Doing stuff for ESPN and Slingshot. A lot of EU interviews, if you guys like interviews. If you like my feature content, I do still do that. It just doesn't get on Reddit as much. But you can find it on my Twitter, and on my Facebook.
Where do you post them?
On my Twitter and my Facebook.
No, where do these what website are they on?
I said Slingshot and ESPN.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you were saying interviews for my EU interviews. I didn't know if the features were someplace else.
No, yeah. The right now the interviews are just on Slingshot, and the features are on both Slingshot and ESPN.
Okay. Emily Rand.
I am doing something, so I have interviews and other features coming out. I'm doing something that I'm really excited about, and all 2 people
Is
are
it
going
anime?
to read. No, it's revisiting SK Telecom T1S versus Prime Optimus from season 4.
Yeah, no one's gonna read that.
I will read it because I am writing it. But anyway.
I probably will too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm excited. I know probably not a lot of people will be, but I think it's really interesting from a retrospective aspect. It also involves Han Labong, aka Khan, who people are like drooling over now. So
yeah, everyone is like trying to tell me that he's like the super good rookie, and just like you realize he played in major leagues before. It's like, yeah, but LPL doesn't count. It's like, no, he's played.
He actually played
Champions.
in Korea. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good stuff.
Mark?
Yep, I'm still doing the same old shit.
No, because you're also escaping esports. You're diversifying and becoming a YouTube superstar.
Didn't we talk about
Wait,
this
you
last
are?
time?
Yeah, but I mean, not the same old shit.
No, not really. So basically, I'm still doing Challenger and LCS. I also am still doing the Blame game. But the one thing that Travis is referencing is I started a YouTube channel called Offline TV with Scara's like streamer house, and we have a lot of videos out now. I think we have like 4. It's doing really well, actually, much better than I thought it would. Just given that like it's really new. But we have like a Meet the House video, us at Anime Expo, and then we just released one where we take all of them boxing. So check it out. It's called Offline TV on YouTube.
There you go. For everyone else, stick around. I'll hang out for the next 20 or so minutes after the show and answer questions and hang out, talk a little bit about what's been going on with me. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, please. That'd be super cool. You can support me through links that are there or travisgafford.com/support. Last week, I think 180,000 people watched my interviews, and 5 of those people chose to donate a total of $35 to support me. So life is going well, in the unemployed world. And yeah, so stick around. Oh, and also I have photography. It's over at instagram.com/SOTLTravis. It's Mark's favorite type of photography. Oh, somebody subscribed. Boom. At the very end, I got my first real subscriber. Life is looking up. He can now use the Travis emoticon. Everything is going great. And that's the show.
Thank you guys. Bye.